Hello everyone. Today's case was requested by a friend of the family, and it's definitely an interesting case that needs to be shared out there. But sadly, it does follow the lines of many cases that we've spoken about before. Kandice Singbeil, also known as Kay, was born September 18th of 1982 to her single mother Pauline in Pontiac, Saskatchewan, a small prairie community with distinct French culture and a population of only 500 residents. Pauline would eventually meet a man named Greg, and not long after, the two would eventually have two more daughters, giving Kandice two sisters named Jenna and Brittany. A lot of Kandice's upbringing also took place in a city called Swift Current, a small city also in Saskatchewan with a population of 1,600, situated along the Trans-Canada Highway about an hour north of Pontiac. As a child, Kandice was said to be involved in cadets, sports, and loved taking singing lessons. Her mother Pauline sang, and I quote, "She was just her own. She did things the way she wanted, and I had to learn to let it go. People kept saying, oh, it's just her hair. Oh, it's just her clothes. She was like a 60s girl growing up in the 80s. End quote. Kandice would go on to have two children, her first being born in 2006, which was a little boy that she'd named Nathan. However, due to Kandice's struggles with mental health and addiction, little Nathan would end up moving in with his grandparents when he was only 4 years old. She had first noticed a change in her daughter during high school. She did know that Kandice was smoking weed at the time, and she didn't think it was that big of a deal. However, the Tylenol bottles in the home eventually started mysteriously becoming empty. And not long after, Kandice was said to be addicted to various illicit drugs, including crystal meth. In 2010, Kandice would end up in Pine Grove, a women's prison in Prince Albert, for a span of 8 months. When she would eventually get out in 2011, Kandice would end up moving to Saskatoon, hoping that she could have a fresh start there, get a job, start a better life. And she would spend some time at a treatment center there, to the point where Nathan actually even moved back in with her. However, Kandice's struggles with sobriety and addiction weren't easy, and eventually she would relapse, and eventually it would worsen, and just a couple months later, Nathan had to move back in with Pauline and Greg. Pauline would go on to speak about the changes in Kandice again, saying, and I quote, "It was before Kait was born. She would get different phone calls, different numbers on her calls. She was always in a hurry, very scattered, almost schizoaffective. When she would come to visit, we didn't know who was coming through the door. We didn't know what personality was coming through the door. It got to be scary because the drugs were affecting her mental health, and the self-medicating and the addiction and the part of not on the drugs or needing the drugs or what the drugs are doing. It was very scary. And then when she told me she was pregnant, I cried." End quote. Around 2014, Kandice would end up back in a Pine Grove Women's Prison on drug charges. That year, she would also give birth to her daughter Kait 2 months premature. Now, on a few occasions, family did end up getting to meet the father of this baby, who was also described as Kandice's boyfriend at the time. However, this boyfriend has never been named anywhere I could see, so I'm just going to refer to him as the boyfriend for the rest of the video. Now, at first, when family met him, they seen him as the more level-headed one. Kandice's emotions were up and down. She had just had a baby, and he seemed to be the one who was very reasonable at the time. However, behind the scenes, things were not picture perfect, because Kandice would actually end up telling her stepfather Greg's mother some very scary information, telling her, and I quote, "He beat me up, he beats me up, and I went into the hospital early because he beat me up." End quote. Now, Kandice never ended up telling her mother these words, that her boyfriend was abusing her. However, when Pauline ended up finding out, she ended up confronting the boyfriend, who Pauline claims allegedly admitted to beating up Kandice to the point that she went into labor early, which is just absolutely horrific to imagine what he did to her to cause that. At 1 month old, Kait was ready to be released from the NICU. However, for one reason or another that wasn't noted, I want to guess they might have done a drug test on her and noticed drugs in her system. But whatever the reason may have been, Kandice ended up being flagged, so social services ended up being brought in by the hospital. And they ended up calling Pauline, telling her that she needed to come pick up the baby because she was going to be given custody of it. Kandice was said to be livid at this point when she found all of this out. She wanted her baby. She had just had the baby, and I'm sure, mixing in drugs and detoxing and all of that in the same mix was probably not great. And Kandice ended up begging the workers to take her to a program called Baby Steps, which is essentially a program where mothers and their babies can be taken to so that the mothers can detox and be observed while still being with their babies. And from what it sounded like, Kandice and Kait ended up going to this program. However, Kandice only ended up lasting 3 weeks there before she relapsed again, meaning that Kait also eventually went to live with Pauline and Greg, which apparently Nathan was very excited about because he always had wanted a sibling, and this was like a very happy time for Nathan. But of course, Kandice was not happy about any of this. Pauline saying, and I quote, "Being in the state of mind with being involved with drugs, it was very, very difficult," end quote. Kandice was now 32 years old, essentially homeless, and she was couch surfing with her boyfriend at an apartment on 3rd Avenue known as the Travelers Block in downtown Saskatoon. This area was full of storefronts and shopping, not far from the South Saskatchewan River. But according to authorities, this wasn't the greatest area, who said there was often people begging on the streets and doing drugs in the back alleys. By April 17th, Kandice had went back twice to visit with her children, once by herself and another time with the baby's father. Pauline saying, and I quote, "Those were hard, but I mean, it was still I want the baby, I need help." You could still see that she was struggling. I was so guilty of enabling, and I really had to hold my ground and not do that. So then she left. Then we talked on the phone, and the plan was to come back to visit, and it was supposed to be on May 17th in that area. And she had missed her meeting with a social service worker, and they were supposed to help provide her to come on the bus, because the bus system was how she got back and forth. She missed her meeting and was upset and wanted to come anyways. And I said, "I'm sorry, honey, I can't break the rules. We're working here with the social services, and we need to follow the rules. You need to go to your worker on Monday, make the arrangements, and come on Tuesday or whenever it works. We'll be here," end quote. However, Kandice would never end up showing up, and Kandice would eventually go missing after this. So let's get into the timeline of the week following her disappearance, because there ended up being a lot of surveillance footage that captured her movements. On Saturday, May 16th, 2015, around 6:27 a.m., Kandice would last be active on her social media, later texting her mother Pauline a week later saying, and I quote, "Come hell or high water, I'll see you on Tuesday," end quote. A week later, on Sunday, May 24th, 2015, Kandice was seen leaving the Hotel Senator at 11:10 p.m. at the heart of downtown Saskatoon, located on 21st Street East, and Kandice was said to be up all through the night. Hours later, which was now May 25th, Kandice was spotted walking her bike around 1:48 a.m. outside of the Hotel Senator. Her bike is described as a distinctive dark-colored men's supercycle cruiser classic bike with white wall tires and a faux wood grain chain guard. About 3 hours later, at 4:54 a.m., she engaged in a text conversation with friends. An hour and a half later, at 6:30 a.m., Kandice would be kicked out of the Travelers Block building on 3rd Avenue South that she'd been living at, and the reason she was kicked out is unknown. By 7:13 a.m., Kandice was observed walking in an alley near the Avenue building on 3rd Avenue South. Less than an hour later, at 8:01 a.m., she was spotted riding her bike north on 3rd Avenue. She then failed to appear for a scheduled meeting at 8:05 a.m. 2 hours later, at 10:30 a.m., Kandice was again seen riding her bike, this time traveling south on 3rd Avenue. Surveillance footage indicates her presence back at the Travelers building around 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., suggesting she returned to that location. Now, what's very strange is that it's said that just minutes later, at about 5:21 p.m., Kandice started texting from a new cell phone, and she texted using that phone until 6:11 p.m. Later that evening, at around 9:46 p.m., Kandice is seen walking near the Avenue building. Kandice is said to have last been seen by friends at 11:55 p.m. at the Traveler Block building. So it's now May 26th, and it's around 1:04 a.m. when she was last seen on surveillance riding her bike on 3rd Avenue, heading towards 21st Street. Only 3 hours later, around 4:11 a.m., Kandice's boyfriend can be spotted looking for her. Her absence was noted by witnesses at the Travelers Block around 7 a.m. Because as you could see from all of the surveillance and all of these timestamps, Kandice was in and out of that building all of the time. So the fact that she just disappeared now was very strange and out of character. It wouldn't be until 2 days later that Kandice's boyfriend would end up contacting her parents asking them if they'd heard from her, which obviously they hadn't. And he would also allegedly mention that it was rare that they would go 24 hours without seeing each other. So hearing all of this, Pauline said to him, and I quote, "Well, you need to get your butt down to the police station to report her missing, because we haven't seen her. I haven't. You're the one who's seen her. You're responsible," end quote. Despite people in her life reportedly noticing her absence very soon on, Kandice wouldn't be reported missing by her boyfriend until 2 days later on May 28th around 2:30 p.m. And of course, police would end up interviewing her boyfriend. According to him, they had recently relapsed after a brief period of sobriety and had spent the entire last day they'd seen each other partying. He claims they ended up passing out on the couch together around midnight, and when he woke up, she was just gone. Now, apparently this wasn't unusual though, because Kandice would often get up in the middle of the night and do what they'd call binning, which is when she would go dumpster diving to try to find items that she could either resell for cash or trade for drugs. What was unusual, though, is that she never returned home and all of her social medias went dark. She completely stopped posting on anything and communicating with anyone, which was a huge red flag because Kandice was extremely active on Facebook. She didn't go, a couple hours without posting something, and she talked to a lot of people. She texted a lot of people. So for her to just completely drop off the face of the earth was a big red flag. But police weren't really buying everything this boyfriend was saying, and they also were a bit concerned. Detective Sergeant Kevin Montgomery sang, and I quote, "Halfway through the interview, there's red flags coming up to me. So she's been missing for about a week or just over a week now. They're homeless, they're involved with drugs, there's talk about a drug debt, there's also some DV between the two of them. So there's several factors here that are way more, I guess, than your regular missing persons file." So right from this interview, I go straight to the staff sergeant in charge of major crime, and we sit down and I say, "I have concerns about this file. This is bigger than just a missing person. I think we really need to consider this as, possibly foul play being involved here." End quote. Now, very interestingly, unlike a lot of cases we talk about in missing persons, Kandice's case very quickly went from a missing persons case to a murder case. And that's something that we don't often see in these cases, especially I feel like in the Canadian cases, police really often seem to like to hold back and just want to keep pushing things back. But I think the police work here is, compared to some of the other cases we talk about, this officer here realized that there were a lot of red flags. There was DV, they were homeless. She was living this very high-risk lifestyle. And thankfully, he didn't just say, she probably just ran off somewhere and she's doing drugs at some other place and doesn't want to be the boyfriend anymore. Clearly, he had a gut feeling that something was wrong here. And I wish this happened in more cases, because there's so many cases that we talk about where we're like, this person had to have done something. Like, this person clearly did something, in my opinion. They're considered just missing persons, and police just act as if they ran off because they were an adult. And, adults can do whatever they want. But because of this, police would end up investigating quite thoroughly, it seems.
We are left with a huge hole in our hearts and never-ending worry in our minds. Every day has been an ongoing struggle. Somebody knows something. Nobody just disappears. We beg for anybody with any information to please come forward. If not for us, for her 2 children. They are so desperately missing their mom. Her son will be 9 years old next week, and it is very hard for him to understand why she can't be there to celebrate his birthday and Christmas. We have no answers for his questions. We have no answers for our own questions. Her daughter, now nearly 10 months old, will not get to spend her first Christmas with her mom. The not knowing has been difficult to endure. We plead to anyone with any information to please just come forward to the Saskatchewan police or through Crime Stoppers to help bring Kandice home.
On Monday, May 25th, the investigation revealed that Kandice was staying at a friend's apartment in the 200 block of 3rd Avenue South, and that's an apartment commonly referred to as the Travelers Block. In the weeks following Kandice's disappearance, numerous downtown businesses provided video and allowed investigators to confirm her movements prior to her disappearance. In the early morning of May 25th, Kandice was seen walking in the North Alley adjacent to the Travelers Block. Later that morning, she was seen riding her distinctive supercycle cruiser, a dark-colored Mins Supercycle Cruiser Classic with white wall tires and a faux wood grain chain guard. Police have not located this bike as well. Fairly distinctive, it has the large handlebars and a rack on the back. At approximately 10 p.m. on May 25th, Kandice is seen on video walking towards the Travelers Block on 3rd Avenue. And 3 hours later, at approximately 1 a.m., May 26th, she is seen riding her bike north on 3rd Avenue away from the Travelers Block. This is the last confirmed sighting of Kandice Singbeil. There are people in this community that have information that police have not spoken to, and we encourage those people to speak to the police, to phone 975-8300 to speak to an investigator, or to use Crime Stoppers to contact the police.
Numerous parts of the city would be searched along the river, since the last place she was seen wasn't far from the river. They also had search parties from the Buckwald Bridge to the water treatment plant. An air support unit was utilized to aid in the search from above that had an infrared camera to detect heat signatures so that if possibly she had drowned or something like that had happened, they would be able to see it from above and then also, detect heat sources of such. GPS-equipped grid searches also happened so that they could thoroughly search every area of that city, as well as residences and farmyards as well. And they would, of course, search the traveler's block. And they would go on to interview multiple people that lived there and hung out around the area because this wasn't the greatest place to be staying, it seemed. Police actually ended up releasing quite a few photos from inside the traveler's block and outside of it. From what is said, this building was essentially like dorm rooms that had a communal bathroom, and they were rented out for about $500 a room. The apartments are said to be located on the second floor, as you can see here. And as you can see from this photo, there is one of the communal bathrooms that is shared by tenants. There was also a shared laundry room that was accessed by going across a catwalk that connected to a second building. The small double doors you can see in this photo to the left is for a decommissioned elevator shaft. You can faintly see a plate in front of the doors sealing them shut. Investigators would end up removing this plate to get inside to make sure Kandice wasn't thrown inside of the shaft. To the right, there's also a single locked door with a small transom window above. This photo ends up showing the state of the room where police gained access. It would end up turning out that a building caretaker had actually found Kandice and her boyfriend living in that small closet type room. And it was assumed that they gained entrance through the transom that you can see in the photo here that didn't have any glass in it. Now in this photo, as you can see, it's at the bottom of the stairs and there was a single door that was reported to provide access to underground tunnels that Kandice allegedly frequented. However, when investigators looked into this and went down there, did all their investigating and searching, they ended up finding no tunnels. Eventually, they would end up watching all of the surveillance footage that gave us a lot of the timestamps for today and the timeline, but they would also end up finding some more information from this. One surveillance video would end up showing a view of the back alley behind the traveler's block. At one point in the footage, it said that a person can be seen in the back alley appearing to be carrying something in a large weight sheet, which is then said to be thrown in a dumpster. This is when authorities began to believe that Kandice may have been murdered and thrown into a dumpster. By 7:34 a.m. on May 27th, a trash truck can be seen taking the garbage from the bins, which now meant that they had to go search the landfills. Thankfully, the trash trucks actually had GPSs on them, so they were able to track down the exact truck and the exact driver, as well as the exact spot at the landfill that the truck had dumped its garbage that day. Members of search teams ended up sifting through garbage that had been spread out. Search teams were given detailed instructions of what to look for, from her bike to what color of clothing Kandice had been last seen wearing, to what a decomposing body might look like, and what kinds of maggots it would attract at the time. The command posts and a loader are pictured in the background here. Over the course of 3 days, the team combed through 184,000 cubic feet of material. However, nothing ended up being found. They didn't find one piece of evidence, one spot of blood there that led to Kandice, which led police to feel comfortable to say that Kandice had not been taken to that landfill, despite them allegedly having this footage of someone carrying what looked like a body wrapped in a sheet and being thrown in a dumpster. After this, police ended up looking through Kandice's social medias and her text conversations, specifically on Facebook Messenger, because she was extremely active and talked to a lot of people on there. This is how police would actually end up finding out that Kandice had been talking to someone for years that had actually previously been involved with a separate police investigation. And from the state of her text messages and from the amount of conversations she had with the amount of people and the types of conversations she was having, it seems like Kandice definitely wasn't associating herself with great people. Police saying, and I quote, "She had dabbled in dealing. She had shortchanged people. She had ripped some people off. She was associated to, high-level drug dealers, and so she was in a dangerous world. She was living in a very dangerous world," end quote. And Kandice had seemingly burned a lot of bridges. Members of the Saskatoon Police Service tech crime units ended up being called in and seized devices that would lead to connect Kandice to 74 individuals in the meth world, as well as the street community surrounding where she lived. All of these people seemingly not great people. Again, she was living a very high-risk lifestyle, yet police were still taking their time to investigate this, which we don't often see. Towards the end of 2015, an unnamed individual would end up showing up to the police station claiming they had a bag of Kandice's belongings. Inside of this bag, police would end up finding photo albums, books, as well as a small diary where there were writings from when she was in prison. There was poems, scribbles, notes, just things that eventually didn't lead to finding her, unfortunately, but it is just a very strange fact in the case. But as I said, this case has been very thoroughly investigated compared to some that we talk about, especially ones where the person is involved in such a high-risk lifestyle. Police saying, and I quote, "Over 100 people have been interviewed in regards to this investigation, and some have been interviewed multiple times. Kandice had a significant other who has been investigated and spoken to. We still have other suspects involved in this also. We're looking for Kandice's body. Kandice herself alive. That would be great, but at least where her body is. The bike that she was using, where is that bike? Sometimes a very little piece that people think police already know, we may not have, and the little piece might just crack the case." End quote. The Saskatoon police would end up producing their own podcast, which is where I got a lot of the information in today's video. They went, into deep dives of some of the information. They released some photos that normally wouldn't be released. And they also ended up interviewing Pauline. Pauline has also done a lot of interviews on her own with the news. Kandice's children have also been featured in a lot of these interviews. If you want to listen to the podcast, it's called Deals, Debts, and Death, which I'll have linked below if you want to listen to yourself. It's definitely a very interesting listen, and they dive a lot deeper into interviewing others who also have addictions, and they kind of give an insight of how the situations were going for them when they were struggling. So it goes into a lot to try to connect you with Kandice, which I thought was very nice. 2 years after Kandice's disappearance, her family was still holding vigils. Her son captured one that took place in May of 2017. Since her disappearance, her absence is still felt by her children and her family. Every year, her family makes a birthday cake for her birthday, and every Christmas they hang an angel on their tree. Pauline also told a story about how one time they drove by a cemetery and Kandice's daughter looked outside and pointed at the cemetery saying that she wished that her mother was there so that she could go visit her mommy, which is just completely heartbreaking because even at how young this little girl is, she pretty much never knew her mother. She was very little when her mother disappeared. And the fact that she's just so aware of the situation and that, she wants to have a place to go talk to her mom and to spend time with her mom, that's just really heartbreaking. Kandice's family also has a Facebook page that they often post on. I'll also have that linked below so that you can go support them. In one post they wrote, and I quote, "It must have been a burden to carry this secret for the past 8 years. It's time to share your information with the police. We know someone out there is living with a secret that needs to be shared. Whether you do it for the money or you do it for the right thing, please contact us. Today is the day. Help her come home." End quote. Now, compared to some of these cases that we talk about, at least there is some kind of information here. There isn't much, but there's a little bit because there is so much surveillance footage that shows, the week prior to her disappearance. We kind of have a timeline and we know when she was last seen and when she definitely wasn't. So what happened during that window is the question. On top of that, she was very active on her social media. So the fact that she completely went dark, that she completely stopped even texting anyone, that's a big red flag. And I think we have two really big red flags in this case. The first is her boyfriend, which as we see a lot in Canadian cases, police don't like to release the names of people, unlike in the US, which his name would have been out there day one. But as we talked about, this boyfriend allegedly admitted to abusing Kandice to the point that she went into labor early. That is some serious DV. He was also apparently the last person to see her alive. And then we also have this alleged footage of someone carrying a white sheet out and then putting that thing in the dumpster. But clearly, police don't have any evidence to charge him, or else you think he would have been charged by now. They have no body, they have no even speck of blood, it seems like. But then we also have to consider the other red flag of how Kandice may have a lot of enemies out there. If she was dealing drugs and she was ripping people off, that's a big no-no in the drug world. Like, these are a lot of dangerous people and you don't want to slight them. And if she was involved in such large dealers in Saskatoon that when the police went through all her contacts, they were like, oh shit, it really does make me wonder. Did she just piss off the wrong person finally and they snapped and they did something to her? But then it also makes me wonder, it seems like she was last seen riding her bike, but then also she was last seen somewhere near the Traveler's Lock. And you'd think if someone wanted to do something to her, they would kind of maybe take her far away, maybe to a rural area and dump her somewhere there or kill her somewhere there so that there's no evidence. So maybe something like that did happen. Maybe they caught her riding her bike somewhere and the police just never found that footage. Or they lured her somewhere and then took her somewhere and did something to her. Because clearly, wherever the police have searched, they haven't found any evidence. So it makes me wonder if they did take her somewhere far and they're only looking in this immediate area and she could be, hundreds of miles away into the forest somewhere, which is very scary to talk about, but it's an unfortunate reality. And as we know, Canada is so heavily wooded in many areas, most of its areas, that we have so many cases that we talk about where people go missing in rural areas that are never found. Makes you wonder, can you just go and dump someone out there and they're never going to be found. It also makes me wonder where her bike went, because if she was home at the Travelers Lodge, you think her bike would have been left there. So it makes me wonder if she was taken from her bike or somewhere where she was on her bike. And maybe the boyfriend has nothing to do with this at all, actually. And maybe just him waiting 2 days was because, he was on drugs. He did look for her a bit, didn't find her, and then decided, well, fuck this. I'm just going to maybe go do some more drugs. And then he finally, woke up, realized she's still not back. Might be bad. And then he contacted her family. There can be two bad situations here. There could have been DV between them, which there was, but he may still not have killed her. It could have been something completely different. Because you would think that, if he did, her bike would still be there. Not saying it would be, but why would he hide her bike somewhere then, unless maybe there was evidence on it? But then at the same time, with this, white sheet possible body thrown in the dumpster, if that did happen, then why wasn't the body found? It's just very strange to me that police were able to track the exact garbage truck, but then nothing was found at the dump. What I do know is that Kandice's family and her children need answers. They need closure, and she needs justice. No matter what she was doing, she was still a mother, she was still a person, she was still a friend, she was a daughter, and she was struggling, and she needed help. Family would also go on to say a lot about Kandice and who she was, and just how much she truly loved her children despite her struggles, saying, and I quote, "Kandice made friends wherever she went. To know her was to love her. We miss her smile, her giggle, her tenacity, and her big heart. Regardless of if you knew of her, were her family, or her friends that felt more like family, we all deserve and are desperate, but especially for her children. She loves her kids. She was very kind-hearted. She would always help people. She always had a very giving heart." End quote. So let's take one more good look at Kandice. Kandice is described as standing 5'4", weighing around 166 pounds, with brown eyes and brown hair that may have been dyed blonde around the time of her disappearance. Again, she was last seen on a bike, which was similar to the one here on the picture. As always, if you have any information on what happened to Kandice, please contact the authorities. I'll have the information down below. Now, unfortunately, Kandice was hanging out with a lot of very bad individuals, it seems, so they most likely aren't going to snitch. They aren't going to talk. Again, we've had a lot of cases like this. The Devin Marsman one is one that comes to mind right now to me. The Layla Santinello case is another one that comes to mind. The last people who seen a lot of these people missing were doing drugs and involved with possible illegal activities. So the chances that they're going to speak or rat on someone, snitch on someone is very low, which is what makes these cases extremely hard to solve, especially when there is no evidence. But there is a possibility that someone out there seeing something and they're willing to talk. You can also do so anonymously to Crime Stoppers. So if you do know something, please just speak out, because, again, her children need answers. Every day that goes by is another day they don't know what happened to their mother. And my heart goes out to them. I truly hope they get answers someday. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.